In a small, quiet town, a fractured family's tensions simmered beneath a veneer of civility. The Everetts, once a picture of suburban contentment, had splintered into two lives defined by acrimony and struggle. Malcolm Everett, a determined and methodical man, had been tirelessly pursuing his right to remain part of his son Chris's life. His estranged wife, Megan Everett, had been equally steadfast in her resistance, citing concerns over Malcolm's temper and past behavior. Their separation had been far from amicable, marred by courtroom battles over custody, child support, and the ever-present wounds of betrayal. Despite his own frustrations, Malcolm had obeyed every court order and documented his every effort to see Chris, knowing each move might be scrutinized in a legal fight that seemed never-ending. Meanwhile, Megan had crafted her own narrative, portraying herself as the protector of a vulnerable child. Behind the scenes, however, her household was far from stable. A new relationship with an enigmatic man named Billy Batson raised eyebrows among neighbors and family alike, casting shadows over her claims of creating a safe environment for Chris. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with unease as Malcolm sat quietly at the defendant's table, his lawyer seated beside him, prepared for what was to come. Across the aisle, his estranged wife sat with her legal representative, her demeanor calm yet confident, as though she anticipated a favorable outcome without question. The judge, an older woman with an air of authority, adjusted her glasses while reviewing the case file before her. Her expression was stern and focused as she began outlining the purpose of the hearing, which centered on Malcolm Everett's alleged failure to meet his financial responsibilities regarding child support. She sought an explanation for his actions, or lack thereof. Malcolm's frustration was evident as he rose to address the court, his posture tense and his fists clenched. He described his efforts to maintain contact with his son over recent months, which had been consistently blocked by his estranged wife. While he acknowledged his duty to provide financial support, he emphasized the importance of his parental rights and the need to be part of his child's life. Across the room, his estranged wife maintained a composed exterior, her arms crossed and her expression impassive. She chose not to speak directly, allowing her attorney to present their position. The lawyer asserted that Malcolm's access to his son had not been denied, but was subject to court-mandated supervised visits, which Malcolm had not properly arranged according to the established guidelines. The judge listened carefully, her neutral expression betraying no inclination toward either side. She scrutinized both Malcolm's and his wife's accounts, indicating that the matter would require thorough examination to reach a fair resolution. When Malcolm's lawyer spoke, she was measured and assertive, detailing her client's repeated attempts to arrange the visits as ordered by the court. She highlighted multiple instances where emails had been sent to Malcolm's estranged wife, seeking to coordinate the required meetings, yet there had been no response. The judge, narrowing her eyes slightly, appeared unconvinced by the sole reliance on email communication. She questioned why other, potentially more direct methods, such as phone calls, had not been pursued, signaling that the issue demanded further clarity and evidence to move forward. The court proceedings unfolded with an air of intensity as Malcolm's attorney maintained a composed demeanor, clearly prepared for the judge's concerns. Anticipating potential challenges, she presented a collection of call records from Malcolm's telecom provider to substantiate his claims. The bailiff dutifully delivered the documents to the judge, who reviewed them with a measured focus. The evidence indicated that Malcolm had made numerous attempts to contact Mrs. Everett, all of which had been ignored. The judge's expression hardened as she glanced toward Mrs. Everett, her tone adopting a sharper edge as she sought an explanation. Before Mrs. Everett could respond, her attorney intervened swiftly, asserting her client's right to avoid contact if she felt unsafe. He pointed to a documented history involving Malcolm to justify her actions. Unyielding, Malcolm's lawyer countered firmly, emphasizing that her client had complied fully with the law, particularly regarding a restraining order. She highlighted Malcolm's adherence to legal boundaries and his reasonable efforts to communicate, which Mrs. Everett had disregarded. The judge paused, her attention oscillating between the attorneys. The tension in the room deepened, underscoring the complexity of the situation. With raised eyebrows, she addressed Mrs. Everett directly, her disbelief apparent. Mrs. Everett's lawyer confirmed the existence of a restraining order issued months earlier, prompting the judge to sigh in frustration. She turned to Malcolm with a firm reminder of his obligation to provide financial support for his child, irrespective of visitation challenges. This assertion proved to be the breaking point for Malcolm, whose frustration boiled over. Rising abruptly, he voiced his anguish. questioning how he could be expected to fulfill his financial duties without assurance of his child's well-being. His impassioned plea hung heavily in the air. The courtroom plunged into an uneasy silence. The judge's demeanor grew graver as she confronted the gravity of his concerns. Her inquiry probed whether Malcolm believed his child was in harm's way, a question that charged the atmosphere with tension. Malcolm, resolute but anguished, clarified that he sought only confirmation of his son's safety. Seizing the moment, Malcolm's attorney requested that Mrs. Everett produce the child in court to verify his welfare. She further stipulated that no financial support would be provided until this condition was met, even offering to escalate the matter to a higher court if necessary. After a tense deliberation, the judge ordered Mrs. Everett to present the child at the next hearing, linking compliance to the release of pending alimony. Mrs. Everett's lawyer, visibly uneasy, acknowledged the directive. However, Malcolm then raised a practical concern about a prior business commitment in Qatar, requesting a postponement of the hearing. The judge, after a moment of consideration, granted the adjournment, ensuring that both parties would reconvene the following month. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the session, the weight of the unresolved conflict lingered. Malcolm, resolute in his determination to see his son, conveyed his steadfast resolve to his attorney. In turn, his lawyer offered reassurance, vowing to persist in the fight for his parental rights. Together, they left the courtroom, both prepared for the challenges ahead. Malcolm felt a faint sense of relief as he left the courtroom, bolstered by the reassurance of his lawyer. The path ahead was daunting, but he clung to a growing determination to fight for his son. He couldn't have foreseen the devastating turn events would soon take. 3 days after Malcolm departed for Qatar, an unthinkable nightmare unfolded. News spread rapidly. His son, Chris, had been abducted from the Everett household in the dead of night. The house was enveloped in a hushed stillness as the family slept. Mrs. Everett had retired hours earlier, unaware of the danger lurking outside. Moving with the precision of seasoned criminals, masked intruders approached the home under the cover of darkness. Their movements were methodical, their presence nearly imperceptible. Without hesitation, they bypassed the home's security with practiced ease, picking the lock on the back door and slipping inside. The dim glow under Chris's bedroom door served as the only beacon in the otherwise darkened hallway. The intruders advanced silently, sidestepping creaky floorboards and avoiding any noise that might betray their approach. When they reached the door, one of them turned the handle slowly, ensuring it opened without a sound. Inside, Chris lay asleep, unaware of the danger closing in. Without warning, they struck. Strong hands seized the boy, muffling his startled cries. He struggled, his small frame tense with fear, but resistance was futile. The abductors worked quickly, carrying Chris through the same back door they had entered. Outside, a waiting van hummed softly, its engine prepared for a swift getaway. "Don't make a sound," one of the men growled, his voice low and menacing. Chris whimpered, his muffled cries barely audible. The kidnappers moved quickly across the yard, tossing him into the van before slamming the door shut. The vehicle sped off into the night, its taillights vanishing into the darkness. In its wake, silence once again cloaked the house. When morning came, Mrs. Everett began her routine, only to discover Chris's empty bed. Panic set in as she frantically searched the house. Her calls echoed unanswered through the halls, and when her search yielded nothing, dread overwhelmed her. Finally, she dialed 911, her trembling hands struggling to hold the phone. Sitting on the edge of her couch, Megan Everett could barely contain her despair. She scrolled through countless messages from concerned friends and family, but their words of support brought no comfort. Her son was gone, and there was no ransom note or demand, only a devastating absence that consumed her. Through sobs, she managed to explain the situation to the police dispatcher. "My son, he's been kidnapped," she choked out, struggling to maintain her composure. The dispatcher's calm, professional tone was a stark contrast to Megan's panic. "Can you tell me what happened? When did you last see your son?" they asked. Megan struggled to recall details. "Last night, he was in his room. I didn't hear anything. There's no note, no call, nothing. But I know who did this. It's my ex-husband, Malcolm." "Ma'am, please stay calm," the dispatcher said evenly. "You're saying you believe your ex-husband is responsible? Has he contacted you recently?" "Yes," Megan said, her voice rising in desperation. "We've been in court for custody. He's been threatening to take Chris. He's angry, irrational. I never thought he'd actually do this. The dispatcher pressed for more information. Did he have any recent direct contact with your son? Any communication that might suggest this? Megan hesitated, trying to piece together the timeline. No direct contact. He's supposed to have supervised visits, but everything's been so chaotic. He's been pushing for more time with Chris, but the court wouldn't allow it. He's been furious about it. We're going to dispatch officers to your location immediately, the dispatcher assured her. Please stay where you are, and don't leave the house. We'll begin an investigation, but we need evidence before we can proceed with any allegations. Megan's heart pounded in her chest. Please, do something. He's my baby. I can't lose him. The dispatcher's voice softened, offering reassurance. Officers are on their way. I know this is terrifying, but we're doing everything we can to find your son. Stay strong, Mrs. Everett. As the call ended, Megan sat frozen, clutching the phone. The weight of the situation bore down on her mind racing with fear and anger. She prayed for Chris's safety, but the silence of the empty house only deepened her despair. Help was on the way, but every passing second felt like an eternity as she waited for answers. Minutes crawled by as Megan sat frozen, her anxiety gnawing at her from within. The fear was a constant ache in her chest as she waited for help to arrive. When the officers finally pulled up in front of her house, she hurried to the door, her hands trembling as she let them in. Her words were shaky and quiet, barely more than whispers, as she recounted the horrifying events of the previous night. It's Malcolm, she said, her voice tinged with desperation. He's the only one who could do this. He's been angry, unpredictable. He's always wanted to take Chris from me, and now he has. The officers exchanged uncertain glances, but listened carefully, jotting down every word. They asked about Malcolm's recent activities and his whereabouts, but with no evidence or ransom note, their immediate options were limited. We'll investigate his location and check for any signs linking him to this, one officer explained in a measured tone. But we can't act on accusations alone. You'll need to be patient while we follow up on leads. The words felt like a blow. Megan's voice cracked as she pleaded, You don't understand. It's him. Please find him before it's too late. The officer nodded, his expression firm but sympathetic. We'll do everything we can, but this has to be handled methodically. Stay here, remain available for questioning, and let us handle it. As the officers left, Megan stood rooted in her living room, her thoughts spiraling. The absence of a ransom demand made everything even more baffling. All she could do was wait and pray that they were wrong about Malcolm, or that, if they weren't, they'd find him before it was too late. Meanwhile, Malcolm's flight back to the United States from Qatar felt like an eternity. The 14-hour journey dragged on, his mind drifting to the unresolved custody battle with Megan. His frustrations with the court system and her stubbornness had been an endless source of stress, but none of that could have prepared him for what awaited. As the plane touched down, Malcolm felt a knot of unease in his stomach. When he turned on his phone, the absence of messages from his lawyer or anyone close to him only added to his anxiety. Something was wrong, though he couldn't yet put a finger on it. Stepping off the plane and into the terminal, Malcolm barely had time to collect his thoughts before two uniformed officers approached him. Their stern expressions stopped him in his tracks. Mr. Everett? One of them asked, their tone formal and unreadable. Malcolm nodded, his voice catching. Yes, what's this about? We need you to come with us, the officer said curtly. You're being detained. Shock washed over him. Detained? For what? I haven't done anything wrong. The second officer spoke quietly but firmly. You're being detained for questioning in connection with the abduction of your son, Chris Everett. The ground seemed to shift beneath Malcolm's feet. What? He stammered, his mind racing. That's impossible. I've been out of the country. I had nothing to do with this. The officers didn't respond, simply gesturing for him to follow. Still reeling, Malcolm was led to a secure area where his belongings were confiscated, his passport taken. The room's sterile surroundings seemed to close in on him as he tried to process the accusation. He protested, his voice growing louder, but the officers remained unmoved, offering no further details. After what felt like hours, Malcolm was transferred to a precinct where he sat handcuffed in a stark holding room. His lawyer, Nadia, arrived shortly after, her expression a mix of concern and determination. They're charging you with kidnapping, she said bluntly, as she took a seat across from him. Megan filed a report claiming you abducted Chris. Malcolm's head dropped into his hands. This is absurd, he said hoarsely. I've been in Qatar the entire time. I've done nothing wrong. How can they believe her without any proof? Nadia sighed. It's not about proof right now. It's about her accusation. She's been painting you as unstable for months. That, combined with the custody battle, is enough to make them act. He clenched his fists, frustration boiling over. I just want to see my son. I didn't do this, Nadia. She's lying. I believe you, Nadia said firmly. But the court doesn't know that yet. Right now, we need to focus on building your defense. They'll arraign you soon, and we'll fight this. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Megan had turned him into a villain, and now he was trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. As he sat there, the word kidnapping echoed in his mind, each repetition a blow to his resolve. He knew the battle ahead would be brutal, but he also knew he couldn't give up, not when his son's future was on the line. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet intensity, the air heavy with the gravity of the accusations. Presiding over the case was a judge known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense demeanor. From her bench, she leaned forward, her piercing eyes locked onto Malcolm, weighing every word before it was spoken. "Mr. Everett," she began, her tone cutting through the silence like a blade, "you are accused of abducting your own son. Where is he?" Malcolm stood tall despite the heavy chains binding his wrists, meeting her gaze directly. His voice was steady, though the undercurrent of frustration was unmistakable. "Your Honor, I have been in Qatar for the past week, attending a work conference. I informed this court of my plans before I left. If I were guilty, why would I willingly return, knowing such accusations awaited me? This claim is baseless." The judge's expression remained neutral, though a flicker of doubt seemed to pass across her face. "Do you have evidence to corroborate your claim?" she asked, her tone measured but firm. Nadia, Malcolm's attorney, rose with calm assurance, adjusting her glasses before addressing the court. "Your Honor, we have provided comprehensive documentation to substantiate Mr. Everett's whereabouts. This includes airline tickets, hotel receipts, and time-stamped photographs and videos from the conference. These are not vague assertions. They are verifiable facts." She motioned to the bailiff, who handed a thick file of evidence to the judge. The judge leafed through the documents with meticulous care, her expression unreadable as the courtroom waited in tense silence. When she finished, she returned the file without comment, her sharp gaze returning to Malcolm. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, preparing to respond, but the judge spoke first. "This evidence establishes that Mr. Everett was in Qatar," she acknowledged, her voice edged with reluctance. "However, it does not explain the current whereabouts of his son." Malcolm stepped forward, his voice calm but laced with urgency. "Your Honor, I have repeatedly voiced concerns about my son's safety. For months, my ex-wife has denied me access to him, refusing to answer my calls or let me see him. She even informed his school that he was too ill to attend, yet she provided no details or medical documentation. Now, after being ordered to bring him to court, he has vanished. This is no coincidence." The judge's eyes narrowed as she shifted her focus to Mrs. Everett, seated in the front row with her attorney. The woman's expression was unreadable, but her body language betrayed unease. Her lawyer quickly rose, breaking the silence. "Your Honor," he began, "my client was acting as any responsible parent would, prioritizing her son's privacy and well-being. The claim that she is hiding something is unfounded." Nadia was on her feet in an instant, her voice sharp and unyielding. "Your Honor, withholding essential information about a child's health goes far beyond protecting privacy. We have obtained records from the school confirming Mrs. Everett's statements about her son's illness, but they also note that she refused to provide any medical documentation or further details. This pattern of behavior raises serious concerns." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. The judge turned back to Mrs. Everett, her voice cool and authoritative. "Mrs. Everett, why did you fail to provide proof of your son's illness? Why have you not complied with the court's order to produce him here today?" Mrs. Everett shifted uncomfortably, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She avoided the judge's gaze, glancing instead at her attorney, who leaned in to whisper something. Though his face remained composed, the tension between them was evident. The judge's voice rang out again, commanding attention. "Mrs. Everett, these are serious allegations. If you have nothing to hide, explain why you withheld critical information and failed to comply with a direct court order." The room seemed to hold its breath. Malcolm stood rigid, his pulse pounding in his ears. This was his chance to expose the truth. The judge's pointed questions, the mounting evidence, and Mrs. Everett's apparent discomfort all painted a picture of someone hiding something. The stakes had never been higher, and Malcolm knew that the answers, or lack thereof, could determine the fate of his son. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating as Nadia seized the moment, her voice steady but resolute. "Your Honor," she began, her words slicing through the silence, "the evidence suggests a clear pattern. Mrs. Everett's refusal to comply with court orders, her persistent efforts to block my client's access to his son, and her evasive behavior are all deeply troubling. We believe these actions are directly tied to the child's disappearance." She paused, allowing the gravity of her statement to settle over the room before continuing, her voice unwavering. "This cannot be dismissed as coincidence. If scrutiny is to be applied, it should focus squarely on Mrs. Everett and her conduct." Malcolm, despite the shackles binding his wrists, drew himself up, his voice carrying the weight of months of frustration and anguish. "Your Honor," he said, his tone raw but steady, "I have been painted as the villain at every turn, but all I've ever wanted is to know my son is safe. I came to this court pleading for help, fearing something terrible might happen. And now, my worst nightmare has become reality." The emotion in his voice was palpable, his eyes reflecting the depth of his despair. The judge leaned back, her expression impassive as she processed his words. Her hands steepled in front of her, she turned her gaze to Mrs. Everett, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Everett," she said firmly, her tone brooking no argument, "I am ordering an immediate and comprehensive investigation into your actions and the circumstances surrounding your son's disappearance. You will cooperate fully with both this court and law enforcement. Any attempt to obstruct or delay this process will result in severe legal consequences." The judge's words carried a chilling finality, her piercing gaze locking on Mrs. Everett, who visibly paled. Malcolm could feel the tension in the air as his ex-wife's composure cracked, her lips trembling under the weight of the judge's demand. The walls were closing in, and the truth was beginning to surface. Nadia rose again, her voice calm but carrying the weight of the moment. "Your Honor, we must acknowledge that Mrs. Everett had sole custody of the child and was therefore fully responsible for his safety. The inconsistencies in her statements and actions necessitate a deeper investigation. Furthermore, given the alarming circumstances, we cannot ignore the possibility that Chris's disappearance may have more sinister undertones." The courtroom erupted into murmurs, the audience shocked by the implications of Nadia's statement. Mrs. Everett's attorney leaped to his feet, his face a mask of outrage. "Your Honor, this is an egregious and unfounded accusation. My client is a devoted mother, and these claims are baseless attempts to deflect blame." The judge raised a hand, silencing the courtroom with a single gesture. Her voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the noise. "Enough! This court will not be swayed by inflammatory accusations or emotional appeals. The only matter at hand is the safety and whereabouts of this child. I am ordering law enforcement to expand their investigation immediately, and all parties will cooperate fully. Any obstruction will result in swift and decisive consequences." Turning back to Mrs. Everett, the judge's tone hardened. "Mrs. Everett, if you have nothing to hide, this investigation will clear your name. However, if you have concealed the truth, this court will ensure that justice is served. No stone will be left unturned." The room fell silent, the weight of the judge's words settling heavily over everyone present. Malcolm felt his heart pounding as the stakes became clearer. Nadia's strategy was working, and the once confident Mrs. Everett now looked visibly shaken. Nadia rose once more, her voice carrying a razor-sharp edge. "Your Honor, there is a critical detail that requires immediate attention. Mrs. Everett has been living with a man named Billy Batson in the home where her son was supposed to be safe. This is not a matter of personal morality, but a significant concern regarding the child's welfare." The courtroom hung on her every word as Nadia pressed on. "By introducing a man into the household without proper consideration for the child's safety, Mrs. Everett has violated her responsibilities as a custodial parent. This, combined with her secrecy and evasiveness, raises serious concerns about her ability to protect her son." Her tone grew firmer as she delivered her final point. "Additionally, Your Honor, we believe there may be a connection between Billy Batson's presence in the home and the disappearance of Chris. The secrecy surrounding their relationship and the suspicious timing of events demand further investigation. We request that law enforcement prioritize uncovering Billy Batson's role in this matter, as his involvement may provide critical insight into Chris's disappearance." The courtroom remained frozen as Nadia's words settled. Mrs. Everett's attorney attempted to interject, but the judge silenced him with a pointed look. The gravity of the situation had shifted, and there was no escaping the inevitable investigation that loomed. For Malcolm, the moment marked a critical turning point, his resolve solidifying as the search for his son took a decisive step forward. The courtroom buzzed with a hushed unease as murmurs rippled through the audience, and even Mrs. Everett's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge's icy stare swept over the room before settling on Mrs. Everett, her expression sharp and unforgiving. "Mrs. Everett," the judge said, her voice laced with authority, "you will explain the nature of your relationship with Billy Batson and why he was present in your home while your son resided there. Furthermore, you are to cooperate fully with law enforcement during their investigation into these matters. Any failure to comply will result in serious legal repercussions." Nadia approached the bench with measured precision, holding a sealed envelope. Her voice was steady as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, the evidence we're presenting casts significant doubt on Mrs. Everett's claims of being a responsible parent. This envelope contains photographic and video proof of Mrs. Everett engaging in inappropriate and intimate acts with Billy Batson, not only in her backyard, but also in the pool of the home where her minor son Chris resides." The judge's expression hardened as she reviewed the materials. The room fell silent, the weight of the accusations suffocating. Each image and video underscored a narrative that was difficult to dismiss, revealing a troubling lack of regard for the child's welfare. Setting the evidence down, the judge's glare turned to Mrs. Everett, her tone cold and unrelenting. "Mrs. Everett," she began, her voice cutting through the heavy silence, "this behavior is reprehensible. You brought a man into your home, exposing your son to conduct that is both inappropriate and deeply irresponsible. You have failed to uphold even the most basic standards of parental responsibility." Megan Everett sat frozen, her face pale and her hands trembling. Her lawyer attempted to interject, but the judge silenced him with a sharp gesture. "Not only have you jeopardized your son's safety," the judge continued, her voice rising, "but you have also displayed blatant disregard for his emotional and psychological well-being. Your actions demonstrate a pattern of recklessness that this court cannot ignore." The courtroom hung on the judge's every word, the gravity of her statements weighing heavily on everyone present. Megan's gaze fell to her lap as the judge delivered her final blow. "A full investigation into your behavior and its potential impact on your son will begin immediately. Should the evidence show that you have endangered your child, the consequences will be severe." Megan's lawyer tried again to speak, but the judge raised her hand sharply. "I've heard enough," she said. "The disappearance of Chris Everett is a grave matter, and this court will ensure every lead is pursued thoroughly. I will not allow distractions or excuses to cloud the search for the truth." Turning her attention to Malcolm's lawyer, Nadia, the judge spoke decisively. "Your request is granted. Law enforcement will prioritize this investigation and provide regular updates to the court. Mr. Everett, you are released for now, pending any further developments. However, if evidence surfaces implicating you in any way, the consequences will be swift and severe." Malcolm nodded solemnly, his expression taut with emotion. "Thank you, Your Honor. My only concern is finding my son and ensuring his safety." The judge's gaze lingered on him momentarily before she brought her gavel down with a resounding crack. "Court is adjourned." 2 days later, the quiet suburb surrounding Mrs. Everett's home was disrupted by the arrival of law enforcement vehicles. Their presence cast a shadow over the neatly manicured lawns, drawing the curious eyes of neighbors peering from behind curtains. Officers emerged from unmarked cars, their movements brisk and purposeful, search warrant in hand. The investigation unfolded systematically, each officer meticulously examining the property. When they reached the backyard, a sense of foreboding settled over the team. One officer noticed a patch of disturbed soil. Its unnatural appearance stood out against the otherwise pristine yard. With practiced precision, they began to dig, their shovels biting into the earth. The rhythmic scraping of metal against dirt echoed in the stillness as the team worked tirelessly, the sun dipping lower in the sky. As the hours passed, the atmosphere grew heavier, the officers driven by an unspoken urgency. Finally, the shovel struck something solid. The team exchanged tense glances as one officer crouched to examine the find. With gloved hands, he unearthed a heavy, blackened bag. A pungent odor filled the air as the bag was opened, causing even the most seasoned officers to recoil. Inside were charred remains, a mix of ash and brittle bone fragments. The realization hit with brutal clarity. These were human remains, and the implications were harrowing. The lead detective, a stoic figure with years of experience, stepped forward, his expression grim as he nodded to his team. The discovery would change the course of the investigation entirely. Without hesitation, the officers moved swiftly, their grim resolve palpable as they prepared to escalate the case. The quiet neighborhood, once untouched by such darkness, was now the scene of a chilling revelation, one that carried devastating implications for all involved. Mrs. Everett's cries shattered the tense quiet of the afternoon as officers restrained her. "You've got it all wrong! I didn't do anything!" she screamed, her voice raw and desperate. Her protests echoed in the stillness of the street, but the silent, watchful eyes of the gathered neighbors betrayed no sympathy. The lead detective stepped forward, his expression grim, as the officers cuffed her wrists and guided her to the waiting squad car. The neighborhood, once a serene picture of suburban calm, now bore witness to the stark fall of a woman entangled in her own decisions. Meanwhile, at the scene, forensic experts worked meticulously over the charred remains recovered from the backyard. Their hardened expressions betrayed the horror of what they were uncovering. When the initial analysis came back, it confirmed the worst. The remains were those of a child, likely no older than 6, approximately 3 feet tall. The bones were burned beyond recognition, stripped of any tissue that could provide a DNA match. Yet, the size and condition of the fragments were unmistakable. A young life had been consumed by fire. The forensic team exchanged somber glances, knowing the evidence left little room for doubt. Though definitive identification was impossible, the circumstantial evidence painted a harrowing picture. All signs pointed to Chris Everett, the missing boy at the center of this nightmare. And yet, without a body to conclusively tie the remains to him, the case became a labyrinth of dark possibilities. Later that evening, the investigation took another explosive turn. Police received a tip about Billy Batson, Mrs. Everett's boyfriend. He'd been spotted in a rundown part of the city, his erratic behavior drawing suspicion. As officers mobilized, the sighting escalated into a full-blown manhunt. The pursuit came to a head as Batson, realizing escape was slipping from his grasp, fled in his car. The chase tore through the city streets, his vehicle careening recklessly through intersections, narrowly missing collisions. Police sirens wailed in the distance as Batson's desperation escalated. His sweaty, panicked face flickered in the rearview mirror as he sped through red lights, the screech of tires echoing through the night. But his frantic flight ended in tragedy. Attempting a sharp turn at high speed, Batson's car lost control, skidding into the opposite lane and colliding head-on with a semi-truck. The impact was catastrophic. The vehicle erupted into flames, the fiery explosion lighting up the night sky and drawing horrified onlookers. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but the fire consumed the vehicle in moments, leaving nothing but a smoldering wreck. Batson's body was found among the charred remains, the violent crash ending not only his life, but also any chance of him revealing the truth about Chris's fate. For investigators, the loss of this key figure deepened the mystery surrounding the case. With Batson gone, all eyes turned back to Mrs. Everett, whose actions now bore even greater scrutiny. Already accused of obstructing the search for her son, she now faced an avalanche of suspicion, her connection to the child's death casting a long shadow over her pleas of innocence. The following morning, the case's tragic revelations were formally addressed in a tense press conference. A weary detective stood at the podium, his shoulders heavy with the burden of delivering grim news. "Following an exhaustive investigation," he began, his voice measured, "we have uncovered substantial evidence implicating Mrs. Everett and Billy Batson in the disappearance and likely death of Chris Everett. Remains recovered from Mrs. Everett's property indicate a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence. While DNA confirmation is not possible due to the condition of the remains, the size and characteristics are consistent with those of the missing child." The room was silent, except for the furious scribbling of journalists capturing every word. The detective paused, his gaze scanning the crowd before continuing. "We believe this crime was premeditated, and we are committed to uncovering the full scope of the events leading to this tragedy. We will hold those responsible accountable and pursue justice for this young victim." The press conference ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The weight of the revelation settled on the gathered reporters and onlookers, the grim implications hanging in the air. Hours later, Mrs. Everett appeared in court, her wrists shackled, her once proud demeanor replaced by an air of fragility. Her face was pale, her expression hollow, but her voice, when she spoke, was filled with trembling defiance. "I'm innocent," she said, her voice breaking as she addressed the court. "I loved my son. I would never hurt him. This is all a mistake." Her lawyer placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, offering a brief, tight-lipped smile to the gallery. But the mounting evidence, the charred remains, and Batson's fatal crash painted a damning picture. The charges against Mrs. Everett loomed large, and the courtroom buzzed with quiet tension as the hearing commenced. The once unraveled threads of Chris Everett's disappearance were tightening, pulling everyone involved closer to the harrowing truth. The courtroom was suffused with an oppressive silence as all eyes turned to Mrs. Everett, who sat trembling under the weight of the accusations. The judge, a seasoned figure whose icy demeanor betrayed no hint of emotion, fixed her sharp gaze on the defendant. Every word spoken in that room seemed to carry the full weight of the tragedy, pressing down on everyone present. Mrs. Everett's voice faltered as she clung to her protestations of innocence. "I didn't do it," she stammered, her words barely audible in the stillness. "I swear I didn't liquidate my son. I don't know how those remains ended up there." Her plea hung in the air, unanswered, as the prosecution rose to present their case. Malcolm sat in the gallery, his face pale and his hands gripping the edge of the bench with white-knuckled intensity. The surreal horror of the moment overwhelmed him. He had imagined countless scenarios over the months since his son's disappearance, but never this. The sight of his estranged wife accused of such heinous crimes left him reeling, his thoughts swirling with disbelief and grief. Nadia, his steadfast attorney, stood and addressed the court, her voice calm but unrelenting. "Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself. The remains were found buried in Mrs. Everett's backyard, alongside bone fragments consistent with a child the same age and size as Chris Everett. These remains were deliberately burned, a clear attempt to destroy evidence. Mrs. Everett repeatedly defied court orders to produce her son and consistently misled authorities about his whereabouts. These actions are not those of an innocent parent. They are deliberate, calculated acts to conceal the truth." Mrs. Everett's lawyer leapt to his feet, his voice urgent. "Your Honor, my client denies these allegations. There is no direct evidence linking her to the crime, only speculation and circumstantial findings. This case is built on conjecture, not fact." The judge silenced him with a raised hand, her steely eyes locking onto Mrs. Everett. Her voice was cold and deliberate as she spoke. "Mrs. Everett, you stand accused of a crime that defies comprehension. As a mother, your foremost duty was to protect your child. Instead, you betrayed that trust. The evidence points to negligence, manipulation, and deliberate efforts to obscure the truth. You had a responsibility to nurture and safeguard your son's life, yet you chose to bury that truth, literally and figuratively." Her voice grew sharper as she continued. "In your care, Chris Everett disappeared. In your backyard, remains consistent with a child of his age and size were discovered. While the absence of DNA evidence creates challenges, the circumstantial evidence leaves little room for doubt. You failed as a parent, and the consequences are now yours to bear." Mrs. Everett's sobs broke the silence, her body trembling as she collapsed into her seat. Her lawyer stood helplessly beside her, unable to shield her from the storm of condemnation that followed. The judge's voice remained unwavering as she delivered her verdict. "Mrs. Everett, this court finds you guilty of the murder of your son, Chris Everett, and of obstruction of justice. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs, the finality of the sentence reverberating through the room. Mrs. Everett's cries grew louder as she was led from the courtroom in shackles, her desperate pleas ignored. Malcolm watched in silence, his heart breaking for the son he had lost. There was no solace in the verdict, only the cold comfort of justice. The echoes of the courtroom would follow him for the rest of his life. Later that day, Malcolm sat in the same courtroom, his exhaustion etched deeply into his face. The legal battle had taken its toll, and the latest hearing, focused on alimony and property disputes, felt like an afterthought in the shadow of the day's events. Nadia, ever composed, rose to address the court. "Your Honor," she began, her tone steady, "the events that have unfolded reveal a grievous breach of parental responsibility by Mrs. Everett. Her actions have caused irreparable harm, not only to my client, but to the memory of their son. It is neither fair nor just for Mr. Everett to bear any financial burden for someone who has inflicted so much pain." The judge reviewed the documents in front of her, her expression heavy with the gravity of the case. She took a long pause before addressing Malcolm directly. "Mr. Everett," she said, her voice firm but tinged with compassion, "this court recognizes the unimaginable loss you have suffered. In light of Mrs. Everett's actions and her conviction, I hereby revoke her right to alimony and child support. Furthermore, she is ordered to vacate the property currently under your name, effective immediately." The gavel struck the bench with a resounding crack, the decision finalized. Malcolm let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief mingled with grief as he absorbed the weight of the court's ruling. Justice had been served, but the scars of the past would remain. 3 months later, the cold, sterile visitation room buzzed with low murmurs and the occasional clink of metal. Malcolm sat at a metal table, his back straight, his expression unreadable. Beside him was his new lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman radiating quiet confidence, her gaze fixed on the door. Malcolm's focus didn't waver, his calm demeanor masking the storm beneath, as he awaited the arrival of the woman who had upended his life. The door creaked open, and Mrs. Everett entered. Her prison uniform hung loosely on her diminished frame, her once vibrant appearance reduced to a shadow of its former self. She looked worn, hollow, and defeated, but a faint, defiant smirk tugged at her lips as she lowered herself into the chair across from Malcolm. For a long moment, the two sat in charged silence. Finally, Megan broke it, her voice strained but sharp with bitterness. "How is my son?" she asked. Malcolm's expression didn't change. His voice was calm, almost detached. "He's doing well," he said simply. "He's happy, playing soccer with kids his age. It's the first time I've seen him truly at peace." A flicker of emotion crossed Megan's face. Relief, maybe, or regret. It vanished quickly, replaced by a simmering anger. She leaned forward, her voice rising. "Why didn't you let him come to see me? He's my son, too." Malcolm's tone turned colder. "Why didn't you let him attend school for months? Why did you deny me access to him? You forfeited any right to call yourself his mother the moment you put your needs above his." Megan's gaze faltered for a moment before she snapped back. "He was being bullied. I kept him home to protect him," she said defensively. "Besides, Billy was living with us. They needed time to bond." Malcolm's lawyer arched an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. "Bond? That's what you're calling it?" Megan's voice wavered but held firm. "It didn't work, okay? Chris hated him. Billy didn't care about bonding. He just wanted me, for love and money." Her tone shifted, edged with venom. "But how did you pull this off, Malcolm?" Malcolm leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but menacing. "I planned carefully, Megan. My lawyer here had a different approach in mind, but I insisted you should suffer just as I did." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "While I was in Qatar, ensuring my airtight alibi, I had someone else make arrangements. Remember Gabriel, the gangster's son? He was the one who took care of it. Logan, was sent across the border to Mexico, then flown to Qatar. He's safe with his grandparents now." Megan's face drained of color, her mouth opening in disbelief. "No, that's not possible. You wouldn't." "Oh, but I did," Malcolm said, his lips curling into a cold smile. "And the ashes? That was a chimpanzee. We bought the body from a pet owner. Your maid, Laura, kept me updated about your comings and goings. That made it easy for Gabriel's men to plant the remains while you were out." Megan's expression twisted in shock and anger. "Billy's death! That was you, wasn't it?" she hissed. Malcolm shrugged, his tone disturbingly casual. "Let's just say I made the necessary calls. I paid the sheriff handsomely, but when he hesitated, Gabriel gave him an ultimatum. Gold or lead. The sheriff chose wisely. He set the stage, made sure every piece of evidence pointed to you." Her voice trembled as she absorbed the full weight of his words. "You paid people to frame me? To destroy me?" Malcolm's eyes were cold, unblinking. "You destroyed yourself, Megan. I just ensured the world saw the truth, or at least the version they needed to see." Megan's breathing quickened, her rage bubbling to the surface. "You're a monster! You ruined everything! You took my son, liquidated Billy, and left me with nothing." Malcolm's expression darkened. "You chose this path, Megan. You played your games. Now, I'm just making sure you face the consequences." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice sharpened with defiance. "I'll find a way to stop you, Malcolm. You think you've won? But this isn't over." He leaned back, his laugh low and mocking. "Keep dreaming, Megan. The game ended long ago. You just didn't realize you'd already lost." Her voice quivered as she gestured to the imposing figure beside Malcolm. "And who's this? Your lawyer?" Malcolm's lawyer smirked but said nothing. Malcolm's response was chillingly calm. "No, Megan, he's the one who makes sure everything goes according to plan." The man's presence loomed over the room, his silence more intimidating than any words. Megan swallowed hard, her voice faltering. "What? What are you going to do?" Malcolm's smile turned ice cold. "Nothing you'll enjoy, Megan. That's all you need to know." As the weight of his words settled, Megan's defiance faltered, replaced by a growing realization of just how deeply the deck was stacked against her. The game indeed was over. The man rose from his chair with deliberate, measured movements, his presence radiating an unsettling menace. Extending his hand toward her, he offered a smile that carried no warmth, only a chilling, predatory edge. "Allow me to introduce myself," he said, his voice smooth and deliberate. "I'm not a lawyer. My name is Santiago Meza Lopez, but most know me as El Pozolero." Megan's brow furrowed as confusion flickered across her face. Her mind scrambled to process the name, her voice tinged with incredulity. "El Pozolero? What kind of sick joke is this?" Santiago's smile remained fixed, but his dark, piercing gaze deepened, exuding an ominous intensity. "You don't know?" he asked, his tone mocking as he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Let me enlighten you. Pozole is a Mexican soup, a dish made with meat. Do you enjoy soup, Megan?" His eyes never wavered from hers, the sinister undertone in his words tightening the air around them. "Because if you step out of line, I've got a pot waiting to be filled." The color drained from Megan's face as his meaning settled in, her stomach twisting in revulsion. She swallowed hard, her breath unsteady as a chill ran down her spine. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaky yet edged with defiance. "What do you want from me?" Santiago's figure loomed closer, his gaze cutting into her like a blade. He stepped forward, his words dripping with menace. "I don't want anything, except for you to stay silent and stay put. If you value your life, you'll do exactly that. No sounds, no moves. Do you understand me?" Her heart pounded, the weight of his words pinning her in place. The oppressive silence was broken by Malcolm's low, mocking chuckle. "You see, Megan," he said, his tone smooth but venomous, "you've wandered into a game you can't win. Every piece has been set, every move calculated. It's over. And if I were you, I'd take Santiago's advice. He's very efficient at resolving issues." Santiago's lips curled into a cold smirk, his gaze briefly flicking to Malcolm before returning to Megan. His voice was low, chilling, and final. "I won't have to bother you again, unless you force me to. Stay in your lane, Megan. Don't test me." With that, he turned on his heel, his footsteps echoing in the still room as he exited, leaving behind an air so heavy it felt suffocating. The silence that followed was broken only by Malcolm's quiet, sinister laugh. Leaning in close, he spoke softly, his voice like ice seeping into her bones. "If you think you're still in control of anything, you're wrong. Your son, Billy, the case, all of it, finished. And the sooner you accept that, the easier it'll be for you." He straightened, the sharp scrape of his chair against the floor slicing through the quiet like a final nail in the coffin. "Take this as a warning, Megan," he said, his voice low but razor-sharp. "Do as you're told or end up like the others, forgotten. And believe me, the dogs don't care who you used to be." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable, like a death sentence. Megan sat frozen, her body stiff with terror, her mind racing for a way out that didn't exist. The suffocating finality of the moment pressed down on her, leaving her unable to move, unable to speak, and unable to hope. Years passed, but the memory of those fateful days never truly faded. The quiet town, once a backdrop to the Everett's fractured family life, bore scars of its own, whispered in half-forgotten rumors and guarded looks. Malcolm Everett had relocated, far from the smothering remnants of his old life, carving out a new existence under a veil of anonymity. But the echoes of his decisions, the lines crossed in desperation, never entirely left him. Chris, now Logan, flourished in a foreign land, shielded by the unwavering love of his grandparents. The boy grew into a bright and curious child, though shadows lingered in his eyes, reminders of a past he barely remembered but somehow carried within him. Malcolm visited as often as he could, their bond growing with each passing year, the threads of their connection strengthened by shared experiences and quiet understanding. Back in the United States, Megan Everett remained confined, her once vivid defiance dulled to resignation. The walls of her cell were a constant reminder of the life she'd lost, though she never stopped proclaiming her innocence. Among the inmates, she was a ghost, her story whispered with a mix of pity and disbelief. Few believed her claims of being set up, and even fewer cared. Santiago Meza Lopez's chilling warning echoed in her mind, silencing any thought of rebellion. She became a shell of the woman she once was, her days spent reliving decisions she could never undo. Santiago himself vanished into the shadows as swiftly as he had emerged, his ominous presence leaving an indelible mark on Megan's psyche. Malcolm, too, felt the weight of Santiago's methods, though he convinced himself it had been necessary. His actions had ensured his son's safety, but at what cost? The question haunted him in quiet moments, a specter of his own making. The case of Chris Everett faded from public memory, replaced by new headlines and fresh scandals. Yet, for those involved, the wounds never truly healed. The detectives who had uncovered the charred remains still spoke of the case in hushed tones, their voices tinged with disbelief. Forensic analysts, unable to forget the gruesome details, found themselves troubled by dreams of fire and ash. And the neighbors, once complicit in their silence, whispered their guilt in the safety of their homes, wondering if they could have done something differently. One crisp autumn evening, Malcolm stood on the balcony of a modest home overlooking the Gulf. The warm breeze carried with it a sense of calm, though his mind was far from at ease. In his hand, a letter, unsigned but unmistakably from Megan. Her words, scrawled in frantic strokes, were a mixture of pleas and accusations. She begged to see her son, to explain herself, to tell her side of the story. But Malcolm knew better than to respond. To reopen that chapter was to invite chaos back into their lives. He folded the letter neatly, placing it in the drawer of his desk alongside others like it. Each one was a testament to her desperation, her refusal to let go. But Malcolm had long since made peace with his choices, or so he told himself. His son was safe. That was all that mattered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Malcolm felt the weight of his decisions pressing against his chest. He had won the battle, but the cost of that victory lingered like a scar, hidden but ever present. He took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs, and whispered into the fading light. "For you, Logan. Always for you." And as the stars emerged, their cold light piercing the darkening sky, the world carried on, indifferent to the shadows that had shaped the lives of the Everett family.